Crucially, in 1979, the U.S. joined a growing list of nations to formally switch diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing.
I would like to read a joint communique which is being simultaneously issued in Peking at this very moment by the leaders of the People's Republic of China. A joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States of America and the People's Republic of China, January 1st, 1979. The United States of America and the People's Republic of China have agreed to recognize each other and to establish diplomatic relations as of January the 1st, 1979. The government of the United States of America acknowledges the Chinese position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China.
Well, good evening, everyone. Hello, it's Sunday night here. Time check 9:03 Beijing time. And wow, do we have a show for you? Of course, you've seen the title of the show. We are going to add a lot of things to that. I have two great guests that are joining me tonight. Cyrus Jansen, we will bring him onto the screen now. Thank you for joining. And Brian Berletic from the New Atlas. Gentlemen, thank you for joining the program this Sunday. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, Alex. Good to see you. Brian, nice to see you as well.
Nice to be on together, all together. Thank you for inviting me, Alex. Always great to have a conversation.
Well, wonderful, gentlemen. We got a lot to unpack here. We're going to try to keep it to 1 hour tonight, and it is going to be action-packed. I know I invited the right panel here to discuss this one. You know, this Taiwan question is very complex, and it often is very tense. We know that, right? Particularly when it comes to the attempt of Taiwan's independence. I know that both you gentlemen know a lot about this. I would like to maybe start off with Cyrus to discuss a little bit more about this situation here. Cyrus, can you share some stuff with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Be my pleasure. It's always an important question, and I think what we're seeing is a very interesting development, because I think there's just more and more pressure that is going towards Taiwan. And I've been listening to a lot of sources. I'm trying to keep a very open mind here. So I'm listening to a lot of what the Washington is saying. I'm listening to a lot of think tanks in Washington to try to, because obviously they are the ones that are moving forward on the foreign policy in the United States. And I'm trying to understand their position. And I'm also trying to understand what China's saying and, you know, what China is doing. And it seems to be a very big disconnect, because I think what people don't realize is that, you know, China is certainly wanting to move forward, you know, towards reunification. But they've also said very clearly that their number one objective would be to do that peacefully. And as we've seen over the last few decades, you know, there has never been a military movement that way. But there certainly is a very clear message from Beijing that they do not want to have the United States meddling in those affairs. And I try to look at this from an American perspective as well, because I know that the United States, we certainly have a lot of strategic interest in, you know, in the Asia Pacific, certainly in that Taiwanese Strait. We have a very close relationship with Taiwan. But it's interesting to note as well, when you look at how our political leaders, you know, continue to make these big mistakes. I mean, for example, when we look at Pelosi going to Taiwan, I just asked myself, what was the reason for her going? There really wasn't a reason. There was no reason for Pelosi to go other than she knew she was on the way out as the House Speaker. This was her last chance. And one of the insiders in Washington, D.C. basically admitted, they're just like, the only reason Pelosi's going to Taiwan is to stick it to China. She basically just wants to, you know, piss off the Chinese government. And she knows this is her last chance. And that's from a think tank, you know, within the United States, who one of the insiders had said that in a newsletter. And, you know, and it just shows you, it's like, and then what the interesting thing that I noticed is that as soon as she went, you know, you look at Tsai Ing-wen, the Taiwanese president, you know, she lost the election as a result, because people said, you know, that bringing Pelosi here is just causing more trouble. You know, you don't have the best interest of the local Taiwanese people. And there's a huge disconnect there. And I think people just need to really understand a lot more about the situation. So I'm going to lead off with that, That's my opening statements here this morning.
Yeah, I mean, very interesting point, Cyrus. I mean, you and I have had this discussion many a times, and reading some of the international headlines really dazzles the mind sometimes when you see a lot of the things that are said about it. We're going to move over to Brian for a moment, and I've also brought Brian onto the show as well. In the later and last part of the segment, I would like to get a little bit of his advice on what is going on in the Ukraine and Russia. He is the expert. He has the massive following, and he has the voice that is needed to get this information out. Brian, the Taiwan question, over to you.
Well, if we look back in history to the century of humiliation, this period of time where the Western powers were trying to dissect, divide, and control China, colonize China, just as they have done to so many other nations. And then you look at how everything has progressed from that point onward. Taiwan, the idea of it being autonomous or being the Republic of China, all of this was based on an attempt by the United States to maintain a foothold, to subordinate China to the West, the United States, just as they have been trying, along with the UK and the French, in so many of their former colonies. They've been trying to reassert themselves, and that continues all the way up until today. And when we look at the situation regarding Taiwan, peaceful reunification is going to happen, all things being equal, and if time is just allowed to work. It works in China's favor, and it works toward peaceful reunification, a mutually beneficial reunification. So what does the United States want to do? They want to disrupt this. They want to, if they cannot prevent it, they want to disrupt it. And they want it to be as bloody and as awful as possible, because the name of the game here is either the US can reassert primacy over the globe, its international order that it claims leadership of, or it's going to perform scorched earth as it retreats from this position of dominance over the planet. And I think that's what we're seeing. And we look at the trip, Nancy Pelosi, I mean, I agree with Cyrus. It was purely to provoke China. It is this constant effort to pour weapons, to meddle politically in the political sphere of Taiwan, and to provoke China to try to start violence to avoid any sort of peaceful reunification, which is otherwise inevitable.
What I'm trying to really get my head around is, why is there such a big interest internationally about this topic? I mean, this is a domestic issue. Some of the statements I was reading before, the settlement of the Taiwan question is a matter of the Chinese themselves, and any attempt to separate Taiwan from China is doomed to failure. And I don't really get a grasp of this. And this is, I think, Brian, it's important that you're on this program. You have, pretty much called every step of the way on the Ukraine and Russia situation. That continues to escalate, but not from the escalation from the internal issues, but from external issues. I mean, are you seeing, just to touch on the Russia and Ukraine situation at the moment, I mean, all eyes are on that region right now. Are you concerned that this, the international media, or maybe, the military industrial complex is got its target on someone else?
Well, we're looking at the situation in Ukraine, and it's very similar to the situation in Taiwan. The U.S. is picking a proxy to wage war against its peer and near-peer adversaries, which is Russia and China. The escalation in Ukraine, this is all because the United States, it understands that if it fails, this proxy war in Ukraine fails, if Russia is seen to prevail. And we already see the global trend, nations lining up behind Russia or sympathetic toward Russia, or at least indifferent to U.S. coercion in terms of pressuring Russia. We could only imagine what will happen and what relationship that will have with U.S. attempts to encircle and contain China, and to do so through Taiwan. And I think we were talking about the elections, the local elections in Taiwan, and how it was a sort of unofficial referendum against this Taiwan independence, and the Democratic Progressive Party, this proxy party of the U.S., just like the regime in Kiev is a proxy party of the U.S. It was a referendum against them. And so I hope that the people living on the island of Taiwan understand that they are next, and that the U.S. is not here to help them. They're not there to ensure a peaceful, prosperous future. It's exactly the opposite, to use them to make them pay the cost of this conflict the U.S. is already waging against China.
I mean, Cyrus, we spoke earlier here. I'm going to pull up a clip that it's in one of our articles. I'm going to get Gawe, our fantastic production team here, that's helping me out. I just want to say a big thanks to my group that's here late on a Friday, or pardon me, late on a Sunday night here to help us get this message out to the international community. There they are backstage. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. If we could pull up the news clip number 7 there that we have, Gawe, this is Cyrus is going to maybe give us a little bit in depth about this tweet. I'll bring it up on the screen. Here it is here. This is over to you, Cyrus.
Yeah. So this was an article that was published yesterday, and this is, Air Force General predicts a war with China in 2025. Tells officers to prep by firing a clip at a target and aim for the head. I hope I'm wrong, but my gut tells me we'll fight in 2025. Now, this is General Mike Minihan in a memo sent to officers he commands. Now, I want to kind of break this down because this is an interesting insight. And again, like I always try to be very objective and very clear in my analysis. And I'm looking at both sides, and I'm trying to, I want to hear everybody's position on this. But what we're seeing here, this is a very dangerous thing that I think the United States government, because I mean, this is a government official. This is someone that's working within our military, obviously a high-ranking Air Force general. If this is his personal opinion, this is where things really, this is just diplomacy, right? If you have a gut feeling, but yet you go to ABC and you're going to spout all of this stuff out, it's very dangerous. And I want people to just think about it. What if it was the opposite way around? What if it was the People's Liberation Army who said, we believe that we're going to be in a conflict with the United States. We need to prepare our military planes to basically take them out, and we want them to shoot them at the head. I mean, if Chinese military came out and said a statement like that, that would be national news all over the U.S. U.S. would be saying, look, China's provoking us. China is antagonizing us. China wants war. But we see the exact opposite. And I think what's important is, again, when I look at, there's a gentleman that I follow his name is Ryan Haas, and he's based in Washington, D.C. Actually, about a year ago, Ryan and we both traveled to Vanderbilt University. We were both invited to give a keynote speech regarding the COVID situation and how China and the United States, basically both of their methods at looking back at COVID-19, basically the US way, the Chinese way. So both Ryan and I were brought into Vanderbilt to kind of dissect that. And I had a great conversation with Ryan. Again, his background is he actually worked at the US Embassy in Beijing during the Barack Obama administration, very good China insider, based in Washington, D.C., certainly very close to the U.S. government. But I found Ryan to be one that really understands it a lot more because he spent time in China, because he spent a lot of time in Beijing, close to that government. And he was on a recent podcast, and he said, our goal should always be to de-escalate tensions in the Taiwanese Strait. That should be the United States goal. And even he had said that this messaging, we have to be very clear, because when you come out with messaging like this is certainly not de-escalating the situation. It's only doing the opposite. It's actually escalating the situation. And I think what he had also said in a recent podcast I thought was really good is, we often hear these things from the U.S. He said, the United States has predicted 10 out of the last 0, attacks by China into Taiwan, basically saying, like, we always say that China is going to attack Taiwan, but we've never seen it. China has never attacked Taiwan. And I think there's, I've made a lot of videos about this topic specifically, but I think Taiwan, I mean, we all know the importance of Taiwan. It plays a very integral role in our world economy. Obviously, it is the microchip capital of the world. The technology there is fascinating. But it's also, I mean, when you start getting when you do the deep dive into microchips, we learn that, there's no one country or place in the world that can really establish these microchips. I mean, it's really, you need technology from everywhere, right? You look at ASML, the Dutch company, they have a machine that, that they have a monopoly, right? That they make a certain type of machine that costs millions of dollars. You cannot make these high advanced microchips without that machine. So, again, you need technology from a number of places and countries in order to, produce these microchips. But Taiwan plays a very important part. And I mean, I think for me, it just doesn't make sense. I don't see China going in and blowing up Taiwan just for the sake of it. I mean, again, if they wanted to, they would have done that. But it's also, I mean, we've seen this consistent messaging from China of wanting to have a peaceful reunification, moving towards that. Time is on their side. I mean, there really is no rush in that regard. I mean, there's no reason for them to rush. But an interesting one is if you look at the United States military budget, where does this 2025? We hear this often. China's going to attack Taiwan by 2025. There has never been any messaging from China's government in relation to 2025. That 2025 date has always come internally from the United States military. Again, that's our generals and that's our military who are just speculating, right? It's just like, well, this is what I believe. And as a result of that, what we saw just recently, the United States, we just passed our budget. Military spending, of course, increased. I think it's at like $850 billion, might be more. But it's at a record high for military spending. But there was a lot of basically the U.S. military is trying to ramp up that budget because we know the military industrial complex runs this country. And, they're saying, hey, by the way, we believe that China is going to attack by 2025. Let's go ahead and ramp up that budget so we can spend more money. We can allocate more weapons to this potential conflict. But again, that's only coming internally from the United States. And that's something that we Americans, we don't understand that. Right? We are taught that, it's China being the aggressor, but again, they've never mentioned that date, and I think that's just a really important thing that we need to understand here.
That's interesting that you brought that up in the dates and everything. The 2025 date. We've seen tensions has escalated, but the news with NATO trying to get involved here, I mean, they've been trying to, deep dive into this issue since 2018. And I mean, we have seen what NATO is capable of lately here. I think you guys know that I've had some, a deep dive in the research of Yugoslavia and what happened back many years ago on how NATO's involvement completely obliterated that country and broke it up. I mean, there were 78 days of aerial bombardment, just relentless. And the scandals are coming out of that. The figures are coming out of that. Where did all the money go during that? Was there any rebuilding of that country? It's been colossal. I mean, Brian, back to you on this. I mean, are we going to, is NATO done here with what they're doing in this Russia-Ukraine, or do you think this is going to continue to try to antagonize what's going on over here in China?
Well, to kind of follow up on some of the things Cyrus was talking about, I mean, 2025, why does the U.S. keep talking about 2025? Because that's when generally the window of opportunity for the U.S. And it's any sort of disparity between it and China in terms of military power, that's when the window closes. It's between now and then that they feel that if there is a military conflict, they have the best chance of winning. So it's not China's going to attack by 2025. We're going to provoke a war with China by 2025, because if we fail to do so, not only will reunification peacefully happen without our ability to interfere, if we attempt to intervene militarily, we will be defeated by China. So that's where this 2025 date comes in. And how does this link to Ukraine? This is desperation. The U.S. wanted to when the Cold War was over and Russia was in a position of weakness, and before China began rising, the United States sought to reassert dominion over the planet, essentially geopolitical dominance over the planet. And they began by attacking. You talked about NATO. NATO has invaded and destroyed one country after the other through wars of aggression, through political subversion. We have articles from The Guardian about how all the way back in the early 2000s, the U.S. was involved in political meddling in Ukraine and putting protesters in the streets to overturn elections in that country to favor Washington's interests, not Ukraine's interests. And that way we fast forward to today, and we can look at Ukraine, or we can look at the people living on the island of Taiwan, and we can look at what life is like for people there. They are not benefiting from these conflicts that they have been put into the middle of. The U.S. using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia, very, very obviously, they're at the losing end of that in every sense of the way. Taiwan, for now, it's just a matter of giving up economic opportunities, economic regression in certain ways, because the DPP, the current ruling party, is trying to cut off ties with the rest of China irrationally at the expense of their own economy, and again, simply to serve and advance U.S. foreign policy objectives. I just, one more thing, and again, it goes back to something Cyrus was talking about, and the need for the U.S. to de-escalate in the Taiwan Strait. Why is the U.S. involved there at all? It is thousands of miles away from their own shores. They're talking about waging war against China over Taiwan, and the fact that they have no military base even remotely close to Taiwan, that they will have to use military bases in Japan. In other words, they don't have any bases in any U.S. territory close enough to help them wage a war against China. They would have to use military bases in Japan, South Korea to do so. This just goes to show you who is at the real root of this problem. The United States is crossing an entire ocean to meddle in Taiwan's internal political affairs, to encourage separatism, and to agitate between Taiwan and the rest of China. They are at the root of the problem.
Yeah, let's go through some facts and figures here. The island's got a population of 24 million. These are 2019 statistics here. Of course, during the COVID times, some of the numbers will be a bit distorted. As we come into the numbers here in 2022, 2023, we'll get more of a realistic picture here. The GDP is 1.35 trillion. GDP capital 56,286. Unemployment rate 3.8. Inflation was at 0.7 in 2019. I mean, here is a place where relatively everybody seems pretty happy. And we're seeing in the media a completely different story. I mean, what is fueling that? Do you really think that is this all eyes are focused on the military industrial complex? Is this the collective West trying to say, hey, we need to, once this Ukraine-Russia thing is over, we need to move on to, another jurisdiction around the globe? I mean, this is pretty troubling. I mean, I've been to Taiwan. It's been a fabulous place to visit. I mean, guys, what is really all of this about? I mean, Cyrus or Brian, you guys can take it away.
I'll take this one, Alex. Hey, Alex, can you check your WeChat? I sent you a photo. I want you to bring that up. Because I've got a really, really interesting analysis that I want to share from a Taiwanese other one. Sorry, I check your WeChat right now.
Sure.
Let me answer.
Give me a moment.
Yeah, let me answer that question because one of the things, like if you look a few years ago, there was an article from The Economist. It was actually The Economist published a paper. It basically said Taiwan, the most dangerous place in the world. And again, it's this kind of continuous messaging that we hear. And it was amazing because I'm thinking, wow, like out of all the places in the world, you're going to say Taiwan is the most dangerous in the world. I mean, give me a break. I mean, look at, we could pick dozens of other countries that are going on this ongoing conflicts and horrible wars that are far more dangerous than Taiwan. And it was interesting because then it followed up with, this reporter going to the streets of Taiwan, and he was going to local noodle shops and restaurants. And he said, I think the best part of the interview is they went to this one individual gentleman who was making noodles. And he's like, how do you feel? Like, what's it like living in Taipei, knowing any day that China's going to drop a bomb on your head? And he's just like, well, as Taiwanese, we've been hearing this for like 40 years. But as you know, like actually, we love Taiwan. It's a great place. I've been making noodles here for the last 40 years. And I'm going to just kind of keep waking up and making my noodles and like just kind of getting on with life because that's what we do. Like I love my life here. Everything's good, and so it was kind of like, Taiwanese people have been hearing this forever, about this. And again, there's certain things that we never hear. Whenever Mike Pompeo or Nancy Pelosi goes to Taipei, they stay at the Grand Hyatt, which is actually a very funny place to stay in Taipei because local people believe that that hotel is haunted. So that hotel, no one ever wants to stay in that hotel, but they will put the foreigners in there. And anyways, I mean, there's massive protest against these people whenever they come. Obviously, local, Tsai Ing-wen would certainly censor that. Her political party would censor that because they pay all of these politicians to come over there. Somebody like a Michael Pompeo, he was paid $300,000 for a 30-minute speech where he could basically, just go on and spout, whatever she wants to hear. But there are local Taiwanese that they go back to that other slide. I want to bring up this because this is what I say is that I'm bringing in research from other parts. So this individual gentleman, he is Taiwanese. And I'm going to read you because I had one of my long-term followers send me this, and he said, "Cyrus, this is an absolute must video that you should watch. It's about an hour long. This is on a YouTube channel that is, it's actually a Taiwanese news channel. And this is the interesting thing that's happening here on YouTube is that there are a tremendous amount of independent media channels that are from Taiwan. They have millions of subscribers. They're putting out content every day in Mandarin, and they are very much saying things that oftentimes get censored in Taiwan because, Tsai Ing-wen is moving down this way of wanting to get closer and closer to the United States, wanting this independence. But, there's been polls that have shown that the majority of Taiwanese do not want they simply do not want independence. They want to have the status quo. That's what the majority of people in Taiwan want. But this is actually Julian Ko, and he gives this speech. This is an hour-long speech in Mandarin. Again, this is from the Taiwanese perspective. He is very, very smart gentleman. He was actually earned a PhD from Yale University in the United States, obviously, so very educated. And I'm going to give you a little recap of his 1 hour speech. And this is what he said. Here's his assessments on the U.S. strategic thinking. Number one, the United States cannot win a regional war in this area, right? This is a point that Brian just hit on because it's way too far. It's an ocean away. The United States does not have an advantage in that region. That's number one. So the United States is ordering its two little tigers, both Japan and Taiwan, to militarize. And the idea is to follow the Ukraine formula on Taiwan, give it more weapons, force it to increase its military budget, station U.S. troops in Taiwan to supervise its militarization. Then it now realizes that the United States realizes time is not on its side. This is exactly what Brian had said, right? The 2025 date. Why do we keep hearing that? It's not because China has the time, right? China has infinite amount of time on this situation. They can wait, and they can wait patiently, for this. But the United States is very limited in its time. So again, this is from the Taiwanese perspective. This is from a Yale PhD graduate from Taiwan. And he says, the U.S. realizes time is not on its side, and that the earlier a Ukraine-like conflict were to happen in Taiwan, the better. His opinion is that the United States will stay out of that conflict, but they hope that the conflict will last up to 3 months so that it can organize sanctions on China. And this is the big thing, is his assessment of the Taiwanese political system is that even if the KMT were to win the 2024 election, its leaders will not have the guts to say no to the United States. They will welcome U.S. politician visits. They will welcome U.S. military aids, welcome USA troops. And this is what he said, is that he basically feels that both political parties, the DPP and the KMT, both lack the backbone to say no to the U.S. government. And what that means, and this is the final conclusion, is that Taiwan has no strategic autonomy as the China and the U.S. progress towards an eventual Ukraine-style war on Taiwan itself, which will be the urban warfare and sieges. So again, I always try to be as balanced and rational as possible. This is why I'm watching videos in Mandarin, from Taiwanese people trying to understand their position. So again, this is not my belief. What I've just said is not what Cyrus Jansen's, believing. Again, I'm trying to analyze, what's going on. So again, I'm looking at Washington think tanks, seeing what their perspective is. I'm going to, PhD professors, that are in the political system in Taiwan, researching what they're saying. But unfortunately, we might look on a video like this that was just recently published. We might look back on this, 3-4 years from now, very similar to the John Mearsheimer, right? John Mearsheimer gave a keynote speech in a university, and he basically said, to sum it up, Ukraine will get wrecked. That was his message in that speech, and I mean, he basically called it out. I think the speech was published in 2015, but that's what he said. This is what's going to happen. Of course, when Russia invaded Ukraine, that speech just went viral on YouTube. I think it has over 20 million views now on YouTube. But again, it's just unfortunate. I hope he's wrong. I hope this situation is wrong on this. But we might look back on this very video and we might see, wow, this Taiwanese professor called it exactly like it is.
Yeah, I mean, I have to add to that. I mean, we are seeing extraordinary things happen with the escalation here in Russia and the Ukraine. I mean, just over the weekend, I think, Brian, you reported on your channel about, the escalation. I'm going to play you guys a video of a gentleman, I think the audience knows from the Duran, Alex Christoforou, and he commented on the Russian, I guess it was a spokes lady for the, I'm not quite sure what her position is. And Brian, you can help me out with this in a moment. But this was her basically asking the media, or she was being questioned during her interviews about NATO's involvement. I'm going to play this clip. It's about 2 to 3 minutes here. And this is quite interesting. If you hear the way Alex describes it from the Duran, he can, I'm going to let him summarize it for you guys. Here we go.
Maria Zakharova, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, she gave a marathon press conference yesterday. We're talking something like 3-4 hours, and she used the Olaf Scholz approval of Leopard tanks to hit out at the collective West. So she jumped on the fact that Germany has approved Leopard 2s to be sent to the Zelensky regime. And she hit out at Olaf Scholz, at Germany, at the collective West. There was a point during the press conference, and she took questions from everybody, by the way, but there was a point in the press conference where you could see Zakharova was visibly upset. I mean, she was very emotional about the fact that Germany and Olaf Scholz have approved the symbols of World War II to once again move through Ukraine to fight the Russians. And she also asked NATO and many leaders of the collective West, you keep on going on and on about how you're not a party to this conflict, but you have the German foreign minister coming out a couple of days ago and saying, we are a party to this conflict. We are fighting a war against Russia. And Maria Zakharova threw out a question to Stoltenberg, to NATO, to Olaf Scholz, to Annalena Baerbock. She said, what are you if you are not a party to this conflict? Because your foreign minister is saying you're fighting a war against Russia. Stoltenberg is coming out and saying we're not a party to this conflict. The French foreign ministry the other day, or was it the French defense ministry? Anyway, the government of France came out and explicitly said, we are not a party to this conflict. And Maria Zakharova wanted to know, well then, what are you? Please define yourselves. She said this, and I quote, do you actually consider the citizens of the EU and NATO total morons? Do you believe that as you send tanks which require maintenance, you still are not party to the conflict? Who are you then? Explain. Just invent some new term to identify yourself. Citizens of NATO states should know their bloc is fully engaged in confrontation with our nation, and this confrontation is escalating. It's quite an intelligent comment from Zakharova. Define yourselves. If you're not a party to this conflict, well then, what are you?
Brian, I mean, these are very, very troubling times here. And I don't think the average person really understands what's going on behind the scenes here with some of these decisions, with escalation after escalation. Just when you thought it was enough in that area, it continues to escalate. It started with, bringing more men, then it was more money, and then it's more tanks. Now it's, we're hearing, fighter jets. I mean, this is a big business. I want to hear your comments on this in regards to what China needs to prepare for here.
Essentially the exact same thing, because the U.S. has had this policy. It has articulated it across policy papers spanning decades, transcending every presidential administration. They talk about encircling and containing both Russia, the Soviet Union first, then the Russian Federation, and also China. So when we can see the exact same preparations being made in Ukraine, it was the National Endowment for Democracy meddling in the internal political affairs in Ukraine for years and years before 2014, and eventually successfully installing a client regime into power in Kiev. The U.S. National Endowment for Democracy, together with the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy, they meddle and interfere and skew the internal politics of Taiwan. They got the Democratic Progressive Party into power, and it is a proxy of U.S. interests. It is not representative of the interests of the people actually living there in Taiwan, just like the regime in Kiev is not representative of the people in Ukraine, which is why you had all of this internal conflict leading up to the special military operation in February, late February last year. So people have to remember, it is a proxy war. It is not. It looks like the media depicts it as Ukraine asking for these things and the West giving these things to them. And something else Alex Christoforou of the Duran has pointed out is that this is a slow walk, or maybe a fast walk, that NATO is doing, the U.S. With NATO is doing, to continually escalate this until eventually the U.S. and its allies find themselves fighting on the ground in Ukraine themselves. And when it comes to Taiwan and China, the U.S. is much less hesitant to say we're going to fight and kill Chinese people. And this is deeply rooted across Western history, imperialism, the superiority complex. Now they call it exceptionalism, where they can do these things with impunity. No one else is allowed to do these things, even if it's in self-defense or in the interest of their self-preservation. Russia is reacting to Ukraine specifically because it is a proxy conflict. It is the U.S. and NATO militarizing a client regime installed into power right on Russia's border. We could only imagine if Russia or China were doing this in, say, Canada to the United States. So if they were overthrowing elected governments, installing viciously anti-American regimes in its place, militarizing their own military, coming to train the military in Canada, including extremist paramilitary organizations into the official armed forces of Canada, the U.S. would never even allow it to get that far. Even fabricated claims of Russian or Chinese interference has led to laws and sanctions and actions taken by the U.S. against both Russia and China. So it's this double standard. It's this exceptionalism. It's incredibly dangerous because, as you can see, they are not. There is no reverse gear. They are not backing off. They just continuously escalate. They're doing it to Russia through Ukraine. They're doing it to China through Taiwan. Whether the people in either one of these places benefits from it, and actually, in spite of the fact that they will be destroyed because of it.
You know, Brian, I continue to go back to this, and you guys know that I'm very concerned about this. You just, for some of the people that are not familiar on how this can get out of hand. I mean, you just have to look at what happened with the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia and how fast that escalated. That went media to negotiations, which we thought were going to calm things down there. And then it went to a 2 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days of aerial bombardment of that country, which never survived after that. I visited that area shortly after that went on from NATO. There was no rebuilding there at all. And, the conditions for why they went in were so thin. And I just have to stress it again to the people that are watching. And I think, while we're at it, let's find out where everyone is watching from. If you guys could put in the comment box on the side there, just let us know where you're tuning in from to this show. We would be greatly appreciated if you could let us know what area of the world it is that you're in. And at a later time here in the program as well, we will try to answer if there's any super chats or any Q&As. We'll try to get to that in a moment. But I'm going to go back to Cyrus. I mean, Cyrus, you've heard me talk about Yugoslavia many times. I remember that was a part of my life where my father, I don't know if you guys know, my father was in the Navy as well, and my grandfather. And my father came home and he says, listen, this is going to happen. And I said, but, why is NATO care? And why is the Americans pushing so hard in Yugoslavia? And lo and behold, 10 to 14 days later, it was full on. I mean, full on. And I'm hearing quotes that there were more bombs dropped in Yugoslavia in that 78 days than both Iraq wars. So, I mean, Cyrus, is there a way to de-escalate this situation?
Well, I mean, I think what we need, I think that's what's so important with, honestly, the power of YouTube right now. And this is why we need channels, like all of us are working hard on channels, trying to promote, trying to prevent what likely will happen. And I think this is why I wanted to bring up, Dr. Julian Go, because it's very important. He's on a weekly Taiwanese show and this is something that I've had a lot of Taiwanese people reach out to me because they've said, Cyrus, there's a lot of censorship. There's a lot of things that are happening inside of Taiwan. And this is really the power of YouTube. This is why there's these independent media channels that are operating on YouTube. And this is a reason why, for example, again, I keep going back to, for example, I'm going to say Ryan Haas, who works as a think tank in the United States. And he said, and he sent out a series of tweets. And Alex, if you bring that image on the screen, I'm going to go through that just very quickly. And basically, this is a series of tweets that Ryan Haas had sent out. And he said, let me bring that up. Yeah, so he goes, I do not begrudge military leaders working internally to build urgency to bolster deterrence into the Taiwanese Strait. Now, again, this is from the United States perspective. This is like internal communication, but the deeper issue here is undisciplined public messaging. And so this is, again, where even somebody, that works at a think tank in Washington, D.C. is saying, look, that article that came out from ABC, that is just not appropriate right now. And that is just escalating the conflict there. And again, I just go back to that point that if China were to come out with that messaging, you would see a very different reaction from the United States. But again, the United States, they continuously come out with these claims. And it is very frightening for the future of humanity, because I think that's good, Alex. You can take that off the screen. I think if you basically, if you look at the future of humanity, right, we do not want to see China and the United States going towards a war, right? There's nothing beneficial for the future of our world in that, because it's going to be devastating for our world. And at best case scenario, it doesn't go nuclear. But this is where we're moving to this very, very dangerous road. And that's why it's on all of us. That's why we're sounding the alarm bells right now. And again, in my opinion, as an American citizen, our government should be doing everything they can to de-escalate that situation. Even Ryan Haas said, the best move for the United States right now is to support the status quo and to essentially kick the can down the road. There's no reason to move to try to move towards Taiwanese independence. But again, it goes to really a very big issue in what I'm seeing is in the Republican Party, because McCarthy, who just became the Speaker of the House, he came out and said, I think that every single senator from the United States should travel to Taiwan just to send a message. And again, my biggest issue as an American citizen, why are we wasting our tax dollars? Why are we spending our budget sending senators to Taiwan? That is not in the best interest of American citizens. It's not in the best interest of our world. Again, the only purpose for you to say that is you're trying to piss off China. You're trying to provoke China. Again, it's the same thing with Pelosi, and it's my issue that I consistently have with this U.S. government is that we do not put our own citizens' interest at heart. Like, what's in the best interest? If you are a United States senator, you should be working for me. You should be making our lives better here on American soil and working on our political system that has a tremendous amount of issues. I mean, we have an entire list of things that we need to fix in this country, but yet we don't. And you see where people are going. It's very dangerous, and again, it's very concerning for me. And I think that's why Brian and I are both Americans. I mean, that's why we continue to speak out on these things, because it's important. It's important that more people understand this, because when I'm here in America speaking to Americans on the ground, we have a very different messaging. People here do not understand world politics at all. And again, it goes even down to our message of, where China has called us out on this, because we say, look, China's government has said, we don't want this fake one China policy that the United States says. On paper, you guys say it's one China, but in your messaging, in your rhetoric, it's almost like you really want to support Taiwanese independence. And we've had Republicans have come out and said, we need to move away from strategic ambiguity and we need to move to strategic clarity. And that clarity should be that Taiwan's a country. So again, like, if you're saying two different things, you're rising escalations. We go back to that clip that you said from 1979. The United States has recognized that it's one China. Before it was Taiwan that was representing China was representing China in the United Nations, and then that strategically shifted over. So we just need to stay. We need to be very disciplined in how that we address the situation. Again, the United Nations. The way that our governments go, we need to be very clear on on that message.
It's very fascinating how our countries, as being a Canadian here, we get involved in other politics around the world. I mean, it's extraordinary, that we are a member of NATO as well. And I think it's, very bothering to me that, our country continually funds something that is, can be very explosive. We're going to look at some of the headlines here. I'm just going to blast through these headlines, and then I'm going to go on to Brian. This is from the front page Sunday Express here from the United Kingdom. Rishi is at war over migrants. That is a pretty hot topic in the United Kingdom as we speak. Violence escalates in Israel when there are 7 killed, and the video shows a brutal beating again in the United States. They have another situation on their hands with the authorities, the police authorities there, which could potentially escalate domestically as well. Our Canadian headlines, we're talking about an overinflated property market. No surprise with that, as the printing machine goes out of control in Canada, and the Trudeau government reels in its handling of the COVID situation in Canada. I have no comment on that at all, okay? Here in Chongqing, I have to say, where I'm living currently right now, we received, during the Spring Festival, over 4 million tourists. That's 4.175 tourists. You can get that information on Bridging News as well. If you don't know about the app, you can download the app for current information as well. Another one here is the Spring Festival consumption mirrors China's economic vitality in the new year. People are back in the theaters. And I have to tell you, in the almost going on 2 years, 18 months, I'm losing count here. Being here in China, I have to say that this weekend, I know it was holiday weekend, but the city is back and China is back. And you can certainly see it. There are people coming all over China in this city of Chongqing. Of course, I was talking to a few people that are local here, and they said they didn't hear much of the Chongqing dialect down in the city center, that there were a lot of guests in town. In Japan here, it's just more of the same. They having a few issues there with inflation as well. And we're going to move on to something I wanted to touch base, where Cyrus was talking about the situation, what senators can do or what elected officials can do in their own city and states. Here is something that if you have Netflix, I really want you guys to load this up tonight. It's called Lead Me Home, a short film that follows several people living on the streets in West Coast cities, conceived to be a cinematic study of contrast. The film will be familiar and shocking. I watched that yesterday on Netflix, and I knew I had to bring it up on the show tonight to give you something that maybe these governments can focus on instead of wreaking havoc around the world, sending billions of your taxpayer dollars to go, wreak havoc. Back over to you, Brian. I don't know if you've seen this show before, but it's something worth watching. And can we bring Brian on screen? Great. Thanks, guys.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I totally agree with Cyrus. The U.S. should turn inward and invest in its own problems. It has plenty of them, many of them arising because the U.S. is obsessed with its foreign policy abroad. And a contradictory, hypocritical foreign policy. Think about the U.S. lecturing Russia about Ukraine's territorial integrity when you can go to the U.S. State Department's official website and see that they officially do not support Taiwanese independence, and that they have a one China policy, and that Taiwan is part of China. This is on the current State Department's website right now. You could go and read it. And yet they're playing this double game where they're saying, Taiwan is autonomously governed. It's a separate entity. We have to preserve its autonomy, and it's none of your business. It is an internal affair of the Chinese people on both sides of the strait. And people who want to, people who want to argue that Taiwan is a separate country, even they themselves do not declare themselves as a country. If you look at Taiwan, it's the government is officially the Republic of China, and they recognize Taiwan as just one part of wider China. And it would be ridiculous for us to believe that the government in Taipei represents all of China versus the government in Beijing. But these are things that ordinary people don't even know, because the Western media, in a very concerted way, deliberately mislead people. They know the truth. When you talk to them, they know these are all facts. Again, you could just read the State Department's official website. They deliberately, when they write their articles, mislead readers into thinking that Taiwan is somehow a separate country, when in reality it isn't. Now, Alex, you've talked about Yugoslavia several times. Again, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. saw this window of opportunity to put into place client regimes in countries all around the world that would reflect Washington's interests at the expense of the interests of the people in those targeted countries. They've done this all across Europe through the European Union. I think we could look at the decisions being made in the European Union right now, and it would not be difficult to argue that they are making decisions at the cost of the people actually living in Europe, especially regarding Ukraine. They've done the same thing in Taiwan. And when they reach a country that is resisting this, that has a government that resists this attempt at regime change, that is when you see the violent protests. That's when you see the U.S. begin escalating with sanctions, arming, as they did in Libya, arming the opposition that the U.S. was cultivating all of this time. And then in the case of, say, Syria, literally invading Syria in an attempt to help augment this regime change policy. And they are doing this in countries all around the world. So there's one aspect, the encirclement of Russia and China with countries with client regimes installed in them. And then if you look at China specifically, the Belt and Road Initiative, we've heard, well, first of all, you just go to a country that is involved in the Belt and Road Initiative and see for yourself how it is positively impacting the lives of the people living there. The United States said, we're going to compete against the Belt and Road Initiative. And then they named these initiatives that no one even remembers the name of because they were meaningless. They didn't even have a fictional conceptual example of something that they would do. It was all hand waving. And in reality, what are they actually doing to compete against the Belt and Road Initiative? They are backing violent insurgents in Baluchistan, Pakistan, and southwest Pakistan. They're blowing up trains and buses full of Chinese engineers, attempting to kill the Chinese ambassador to Pakistan. They're in Myanmar, backing a violent opposition, attacking Chinese factories, attacking the Chinese pipeline there. That's part of the Belt and Road Initiative. They're here in Thailand backing an opposition that wants to cancel the Thai-Chinese high-speed rail and replace it with the Hyperloop, which is technology that, as of right now, does not even exist. This is what they're doing in literally every country around the world. When you understand that the U.S. is investing in armed groups that are killing Chinese people right now in, say, Pakistan, or had been in Xinjiang, or were trying to burn Hong Kong down. The U.S. in many ways is already at war with China, just in a very somewhat indirect way. And this is what China and also Russia are reacting to, this very real, clear, and present threat posed to them. And then the Western media, knowing that the public is ignorant, they're able to spin Chinese investment in its military or Russia going into Ukraine as some sort of unprovoked aggression, when in reality is them reacting to decades of concerted aggression all along their borders and within their borders.
Yeah, let me step in here, Brian. I mean, this is why Serbia is really pushing back on the European Union. And here's what I think is going to derail this whole program that they're trying to, progress forward with. I mean, it's tanks, then it's airplanes. I think there is going to be one of these countries in the EU that is going to say, okay, you know what? We're out. Enough is enough. It could be Hungary. I mean, they are definitely trying to hold their ground there. But, the EU is pressuring them with, cutting off some of the financing that is going on there. I think, the average person, the citizens have had enough. I mean, they're brunting the payment for this whole thing. I mean, a year ago, they had, I think, the media had people on their sides, but a lot of people, they're taking the flags off their profiles. I mean, they've had enough. I mean, this hit them in the pocketbook. And when people are trying to, say, hey, it's the government, it's their choice. They're going to do what they do. I mean, that is not in the interest of the people. I mean, would you like to see your electricity bill skyrocket? Well, I've seen my mother's electricity bills skyrocket. I've seen her gas bills skyrocket, her food skyrocket. I mean, all these things hit the average person. And I mean, you get people that would say, I'll give you an example. Like, to me, people would say, well, Alex, if you don't like Canada, move. Well, yeah, I did. And that's exactly, the situation where I think a lot of people are getting strung out. And that's why that documentary really, let me just see if I can pull that back up again here. That documentary really hit me hard when I was watching it the other day on Netflix. I mean, I cannot believe, and when I try to explain this to some of the my local Chinese friends here about, here's society in another country and the treatment of people, they say, how is that possible? That can't possibly be true. I mean, you should see that film on Netflix. It is really a difficult one to watch. I mean, I'm not even sure if I'm going to show it to my friends here because they would be quite disturbed at it. But it does tell a true question on why is there such a focus on, creating havoc in other parts of the world here? We've seen it going on right now. We're also seeing some other tensions in other countries picking up as well. I'm going to pass this back to Cyrus now. Cyrus, I mean, really, I've asked you already once on how this is going to de-escalate. Is there, how are we going to get out of this?
Well, I think that's the magic question. That's $1 million question. I mean, I think that, I mean, my hope is that common sense prevails and that we can realize that, most likely, I mean, if we look at these models and you got to imagine that both the United States and China both have these war models that can predict the future of war. I mean, I don't think that the United States is in a position of power if we were going to try to launch a war in Asia Pacific. That's exactly why Julian Ko, the doctor in Taiwan, he said is that the United States the way that they would do that would be to station some troops to supervise the military operations, but they would most likely try to bring Japan in. They would try to have the Taiwanese fight this war, but the United States would be at a strategic disadvantage, given the geographical location of this. But it's something that I think we just need to have more rational people in our politics. I think, again, mentioned it many times, Ryan Haas, I believe he's somebody that's an American in Washington, D.C. that has a much more objective view about China, understands it a bit more. Unfortunately, in our policies, in our politics in America, we have a very extreme people being elected. I mean, again, with this Republican Party, and they are 100% trying to just provoke and antagonize China as much as possible. I mean, and they are going down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. I mean, when you listen to, again, you look at like Mike Pompeo was on another network the other day, and his stance is that, China engineered COVID-19 in a factory. They purposely unleashed it on the world. China's government, has gone down this road. I made a video a couple weeks ago talking about how Kyle Bass, who is this hedge fund manager, who has tried to short the, he tried to short the Hong Kong dollar. He's lost millions of dollars, in his hedge fund because he always tries to short China. And the thing is he had said, he's like, well, if you look at it, Asian people aren't affected by this, but Caucasian people are. Again, this is China's government, doing this on purpose. So they resort to conspiracy theories. They go down and they paint China in the most negative light. Again, they're saying, oh, TikTok is this national security threat. Oh, there's microchips in your toaster. China's spying on you from your toaster. I mean, this is the rhetoric that is coming from this far right side. And unfortunately, it's very disturbing because, in America, people are just not smart enough to do their research. Well, be honest, they don't care. So they just listen to this, this propaganda that's being spewed inside this country. And we have a very negative opinion about China. This is why I'm back in the United States, because I connect with so many people here on the ground. And when I think you can actually have an objective conversation about China, and again, I made another video where I went to the Consumer Electronics Show, and I just simply walked around and I said, look at all of these companies here. Every single one of them has connections back to, back to mainland China. It's that picture on the top right corner, insane Chinese tech. So I went to America's largest tech show, and it's called Chinese Technology is Everywhere. And that video was really good because all of these companies, and this is what I often say, when you connect with people that understand business, understand our world economy, I believe that they have a very different perspective about China. So here's me walking around in Las Vegas. This is at the world's largest consumer electronics show. We have over 100,000 people in attendance, and everybody was so bullish on China because this is what people said. They said, wow, for the first time in 3 years, China's opening up. China's, we're going to be able to do more business with China. So again, there's the huge disconnect in American society from what our politicians say to what really is happening on the ground in America and what businesses say. And I think it's just really, we need to have more people sounding these alarm bells. And this is why our work on YouTube is very important, because, we're trying to educate people and trying to give them a better perspective. But again, if we look at these models of war, if the United States and China go to war, best case scenario, we're going to destroy Taiwan and, hopefully not go nuclear. That's the best case. So that's just a disaster for the future of our world and humanity. And it's just something that we need to be, 100% against. But again, it's this, like you said, you bring up this Netflix documentary. I mean, there's so many problems in America, and it's sad. I mean, it's so funny too, because, we look at, like, we love our military here in the United States so much, but yet we have, tens of thousands of homeless veterans everywhere, right? I mean, they can't get the proper medical care in this. I mean, if we love the United States military so much, why do we have our veterans that are, on the streets and homeless and can't get proper medical care? I mean, it's such a very contrasting society here in America. There's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad, but it's so polarized. The violence here is crazy. I mean, it's a very interesting case study to look at America. But again, I mean, we live in an echo chamber where, we always think that we're number one. We always think that we're the best. And unfortunately, most Americans don't have a passport. They've never traveled outside of the country. They have no idea what's going on in the world. And again, just to touch on, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but just to touch on that Belt and Road Initiative, this is something that I'm actually doing a deep dive in. So I'm making a series of videos on China's Belt and Road around the world, because, you look at Africa, this is the big thing. when the United States looks at Africa, they always look at it as a problem to solve. When China looks at Africa, it always looks as an opportunity. And, Biden comes out, we're going to do the Build Back Better, the triple B plan. Again, like here we are 15 months after that announcement, nothing, like you cannot find anything online. There's been nothing about this, but we just spew this out because
Cyrus, I call it the Built Back Bankrupt.
It's just, but again, we just announced these plans, it's kind of like people at the beginning of the year. It's like, hey, I've just joined a gym and I'm going to lose 50 pounds and run a marathon. And then your friends are like, hey man, that's awesome. Like look at you, you're doing a great job. No, you haven't done anything yet. Don't tell people you're going to lose 50 pounds and run a marathon. Go do it first, and then be like, "Oh wow, you actually did something great." But that's what we do. We just say like, "Hey, we're gonna invest all these things," and it's like, well, actions speak louder than words. I mean, you look at the projects that are happening in throughout the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, it is quite amazing. And I'll be the first to say, not everyone's successful, but when China is investing in 1,300 projects around the world, obviously some are going to fail, some are going to succeed, many will be in the middle of the pack, but overall, there's been a lot of lives that have been helped by that, and I think it's worth a deeper dive. That's why I'm doing a whole deep dive analysis on the Belt and Road Initiative and these projects around the world.
Well, Cyrus, that's nice to hear that news, because I'm going to be doing some deep dive into those topics as well. Maybe we can collaborate on a video coming up on that. Thank you for that, Cyrus, and I want to commend you, gentlemen. Brian as well. This is your channel, The New Atlas. For everybody that's watching these programs today, all the links for all these channels are below. You can support these channels. Each channel has their own ways that you can support them, even by watching the videos is great, or even getting the message out, or even forwarding the links to to your friends or family to get the message out. This is Brian's channel, and Brian, you've had remarkable growth here over the last year here. I commend you for that. But there's a reason why you have the growth, because you are one channel where people need to get information from, factual information from. And it's extraordinary that, most of this big tech has been trying to silence most of these channels, my channel, your channel, Cyrus' channel, and of course, Patrick Lancaster's, which we'll play a little clip later. He was trying to get on the show tonight, but he's currently in a pretty hot zone in the world right now. But anyway, Brian, maybe tell the audience just a little bit about your channel here. I know that we're approaching the 4,000 viewers on the program. They would like to hear what you have on your channel, and how you do your research and get the message out to people about what's really going on.
Well, essentially what I do is geopolitical analysis. There's a heavy military component just because of my background, having been in the U.S. military and having an occupation that was technical in nature. And so before this, I was mostly focused on U.S. interference around the world and illustrating how the U.S. is interfering along the periphery of both Russia and China, and what China is doing and what the U.S. is doing to undermine it, how the U.S. is infiltrating into a country through political interference. It would never tolerate being done within its own borders by another foreign power, by the way, and how it turns the population, weaponizes the population against their own best interests, where you divide a society, where you have mobs out in the streets literally burning the country to the ground. And this is what I've been focusing on for several years. But I'm also now obviously very focused on the situation in Ukraine. It's important to enhance people's understanding of what's going on in Ukraine. When we're told that the HIMARS and the M777 were game changers, I need to explain to people that it isn't going to be, and that in a few months from now, they're going to be talking about another wonder weapon. And here we are talking about more wonder weapons. And it's important to educate people about how warfare actually really works versus how it's being presented by the media, so that we can make informed decisions about how we see these events as they unfold. Even if the U.S. was trying to really help Ukraine, which it isn't, looking at how they're doing it, this should be raising alarm bells across the West, the Western population, whose name this is all being done in. So that's what I focus on: U.S. interference and U.S. led conflicts or U.S. driven conflicts.
I've got a 3D slide I wanted you to bring up because it was funny. I was watching some of these news stories about, and you just touched in on the tank situation, and I was very curious about this situation, and it was one that you brought up just recently on your show. I mean, what for the audience here? I mean, this got headlines everywhere. Okay, the tanks, the tank talk as we call it. It got headlines everywhere. This is maybe you can just discuss what we're looking at here in one of the 3D models I brought up here.
This is a M1 Abrams main battle tank. It's made by General Dynamics. It's gone through many iterations. The M1A1 is actually the one that I was trained to work on as an electro-optical ordnance repairman, which involves working on the fire control and the optics. And interestingly enough, the fire control and optics being upgraded is one of the main factors that delineate one version from the other. There's also armor upgrades and also improvements on the engine. It was, I mean, this is from the 1980s, and so they've been improving it over the years. There's many different versions. There's a version that the United States itself uses, and then there's one that they export. The one that the U.S. uses has depleted uranium, ceramic, and supposedly classified components to the armor. The one that they export does not. And so the one that they're going to be sending to Ukraine, the one that we see burning in heaps in Yemen, used by Saudi Arabia, that is the export version. I pointed it out. I've been inside an M1 Abrams. I know how complex they are. It is not something you just pick up in a week or two. Yeah, yes, you can learn how to drive it and point the gun and maybe even fire it. But to use it effectively on the battlefield, absolutely not. It takes almost half a year for an entry-level tanker to learn how to do this. And then in the crew, it's a 4-man crew. Soviet and Russian tanks have 3 because there's an autoloader. You need to have a man who is actually loading the ammunition into the gun between each shot. And that they have to be led by a tank commander who would have years of experience on this particular tank. And there's no possible way for the U.S. and its allies to impart that necessary experience onto Ukrainian forces to use these effectively on the battlefield. We know that they can be defeated by even irregular forces, by older Russian-made anti-tank weapons. So putting these on the battlefield in Ukraine up against the combined forces of the Russian Federation, this is suicide, what they're doing. If you actually care about Ukrainians, you would be opposed to this rather than encouraging this.
Well, I appreciate your insight on that, Brian. Cyrus, I wanted to also commend you for your work. I mean, you're back in America now. I mean, you're talking about, I hear a key line from you all the time is a bridge. You're building a bridge here to try to bring these nations together. Maybe you can share a little bit about that with the audience here. And then I have a small little bit I want to just chat, and then we'll hit some Q&As, and we should wrap it up after that. But let's tell us about what you're really, your goal or what you want to accomplish here in the next year or two, being where you are.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We've had some great growth on the channel, and I think a lot of people are resonating with the message of trying to promote a better understanding of China and trying to promote a way that we can finally find a way to work together. I mean, I often look at it from the business side of just simply how many U.S. corporations we have operating in the United States, in China. I was working in the industry in Shanghai for many years. I was very close with the American Chamber of Commerce. I mean, it was amazing how big a presence we had from American companies coming to China, building factories. And it's just a simple thing where, again, I just don't see the rhetoric that I'm hearing in the United States isn't matching up with the reality that's happening inside of China. I mean, people just don't understand. Let's move our factories out of China. Let's decouple from China. I mean, it's literally impossible for the United States to do that. Our economies are so connected, and it goes both ways. I mean, China needs a strong relationship with America. America needs a strong relationship with China. I mean, and it's interesting because, again, when you connect with people that really understand the situation, this tension between the United States and China is often over exaggerated. 2022 was the largest amount of trade that was ever done between the two countries. And again, I went to that trade show, the largest consumer electronics show, a tremendous amount of bullishness and people wanting to, manufacture their products in China, wanting to connect to China, wanting to tap that Chinese consumer market because it is so valuable. We see now the borders in China are open. I mean, there is huge reports coming out of Europe. The luxury sector is dying to get these Chinese tourists back because they make up of 1/3 of all luxury purchases around the world for these high-end fashion brands, things like that. So again, it's we're seeing that the Chinese consumer is very important to the world economy. The Chinese economy is very important. And it's interesting. I mean, I don't really like to quote Bill Gates. I'm not a huge fan, but I do think that he did say something very interesting where he had said as well is that the Chinese economy growing is a good thing for the world. And he said right now, unfortunately, if you were to look at the politicians in this country and you were to say, how can we contain China? How can we smack them in the knee and try to cap their growth in the future? How do we, take down China's economy by 10, 20%? Many politicians want that, but it's actually would backfire on the United States because if China's economy, continues to contract, that's not good for our own economy. And again, this is something that I often say is, we live in this global economy. And again, it's just, we need to understand better how this relationship works. So that's kind of, the main motivation for the channel is just trying to promote a better understanding, trying to promote how we can work together. And that's just comes from me living in China for 10 years and, seeing the businesses that are being established there and the relationships that are being built.
Well, looking forward to getting you back here in China soon, Cyrus. We got a lot of work to do here, especially, and maybe we'll swing down to say hi to Brian while we're at it, who is in Thailand. I just wanted to also say thank you to my team that is behind me right there. Thank you very much, guys, for helping me out with tonight's program. I greatly appreciated my team here in the studio, the I Chung Ching, and of course, you guys know me from Reporterfy Media. I also wanted to say a special thank you to Patrick Lancaster. He really wanted to be on the show tonight, but he couldn't make it due to, of course, the situation where he is at. But I have to tell you guys, every person that is sharing this screen right now puts time and energy into what they do. This comes from passion. It comes from hard work. It comes from determination, and it comes from people that generally care about the well-being of all of us here. These aren't gentlemen that are just sitting in their basement spewing rhetoric. These are gentlemen that take this quite serious. Don't underestimate how serious YouTubers, or we'll call content creators, are. Let me give you a 30-second clip. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but I'll put his link is actually in the description below. Patrick Lancaster. This is a freelance journalist that is from the United States of America. But here's a clip of Patrick's day-to-day life reporting for you, the viewer out there.
Several incoming shells are coming right now. Да, и не вставать.
Remarkable coverage. No, he is not there reporting for BBC. He is there reporting for you, the viewers, just like every other person on this program tonight. We do it from passion. I have to, again, thank you so much to this panel. I'm going to hand it to Cyrus, then to Brian, and I'll wrap up this show right after that. Let's go to Cyrus, last words, and then on to Brian, and then I'll wrap it up. Thanks, gentlemen. Over to you, Cyrus.
All right, perfect. Guys, thank you so much for having me on the show tonight. It's always a pleasure to join in and talk about important issues. I think the Taiwan one is one that we're going to continue to monitor, continue to watch. And again, I just hope that from Julian Coe, those words that were shown in that YouTube video, I hope that that's not something that we look back on a couple of years from now and say, wow, he predicted exactly how this is going to happen. And I think that comes from more independent media like ourselves trying to raise awareness and certainly pushing back against the government officials that want to, move us down this road. I mean, again, the United States should be doing everything it can to de-escalate the situations and call for peace. And I think right now, I mean, my thing would be to maintain the status quo and let Taiwan and China, work towards what they need to work towards, and let them do it on their timeline. Again, China has shown no rush. If they wanted to invade Taiwan, they would have done it. They basically haven't, and I think that's something very important that we need to see. And even the messaging from China, I mean, they have not said that they are going to be invading or attacking Taiwan at any point. So I just think we just need a little bit more rational analysis, and I hope that we can continue to make that message clear to our politicians so that we don't get in a conflict that's going to end the future of our world.
Amen to that. Over to you, Brian.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on. It's always a pleasure. It's really great to share the screen with Cyrus. I really admire what he's doing. We have the same end goal, but we have a different approach, which is absolutely necessary because there's all kinds of different people out there with different points of view, a different basis of knowledge, and we have to do as much as we can to approach and get through to each group of people. Everyone counts. We want a better future for everyone. Everyone, when they're doing better, we will also be doing better. If that makes any sense. I agree with a lot of what Cyrus is saying, and a lot of the things he's pointing out are really crucial for people to understand about the interconnectivity between the U.S. and China, and how this attempt to decouple just to sabotage China's growth is going to be disastrous. I just want people to consider there for just a moment just the numbers, the sheer size of the Chinese population and economy, not just GDP, but industrial output, this vast size of the market. As Chinese President Xi Jinping said himself, it is an ocean, it's a sea, it's not a pond. You cannot just drop a rock in it and affect the entire economy. And what he's trying to say is that when you try to sabotage China's growth, and you have to ask yourself, why are you trying to do that in the first place? It's not going to have the effect that you think. Look at what the collective West is trying to do to Russia and how difficult that is. And then imagine trying to do that to China. And now that Russia and China already have a large number of mutual interests that they're cooperating along. And now because of this conflict the U.S. is electing to have with both Russia and China, it's pushing Russia and China closer and closer together strategically and militarily. So all of these things are important to think about. China has a larger population. They have more infrastructure, more industry. They graduate millions more every single year in terms of key fields like science, technology, engineering, mathematics. They are going to surpass the U.S., and there's nothing the U.S. can do to stop that. All the U.S. can do is let go of this unrealistic fantasy of world domination and stop attempting to impose itself upon the entire planet and find a constructive role to play among all other nations. And it will happen sooner or later anyway. It's just a matter of how much trouble these people and the American people dragged along for the ride are going to have to go through to get to that point where America is going to have to find its place. And as Cyrus said, and this is how I'll end it, as Cyrus said, we have to try to improve people's understanding. The more people understand what's actually really going on, the smoother this process will be, this transition, this historical inflection point that we find ourselves at. So we just have to keep up at it. And there's ways for absolutely everyone to contribute in so many different ways. Even just, I always tell people, even if you're just sharing my work with other people, getting this information out, sending me news articles, that is such a huge help. And I greatly appreciate that. It's not the growth of my channel, it's the people supporting it. That is what has made all of this possible. And it's what gives me hope that there is a chance for a better future. So thank you, Alex, and thank you, Cyrus.
Yeah.
Well, greatly appreciated, gentlemen. Wow, I really thank you, Cyrus, for waking up so early. It's probably 4 or 5 a.m. where you are. Once again, I commend you both for sharing the screen with me here on this fantastic Sunday here out of China. We're going to leave it at that, gentlemen. We'll see everyone in a couple of weeks. And don't forget, if you like a topic that you want us to bring up on this program in a couple of weeks' time on the Let's Talk China show, don't forget to leave a comment below. And definitely don't forget to subscribe to every one of these gentlemen's channels, of course. And we look forward to talking to you guys. Now, we're not going to leave you high and dry. We always leave you with a little bit of an outro. So thanks again. We appreciate it. And gentlemen, what a great show. Take care, guys.